Good evening. Welcome to the first meeting of the Personnel Board. Could I have nominations for a chair?
I'd like to nominate Rachel Bishop first.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Do we have any other nominations? Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. The next item of business is appointment of a vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Prue Bray.
Super. Do I have a seconder? Super. Thank you very much, Lindsay. Do we have any other nominations? Thank you very much, Prue. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Pauline Hellier-Simons and Stuart Monroe is attending online.
Super. Good evening. So the next item on the agenda is minutes of the previous meeting, and we've got quite a few of them to go through, and not all of us were at all of the meetings. So we'll start on 13th of January. Are there any questions about the minutes for the Personnel Board held on the 13th of January? No? Do I have a proposer for those?
I'll propose that we accept those minutes.
Super. Pauline to second? Super. Okay. All those in agreement? Okay, fantastic. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Lindsay, fantastic. Okay. So the next one is the Personnel Board held on the 23rd of January. We've got excellent. Yes, every 10 days. Yeah. So do we have any questions about the Personnel Board from the 23rd of January? No? Do I have a proposer?
Propose that we accept those minutes.
Super. Pauline is seconding. All those in favour? Fantastic. Anybody against? And abstentions? Prue. Super. Minutes of a Personnel Board held on the 6th of February. Any questions? No. A proposer?
I have the feeling I'm with all of these, so you're going to keep performance every time.
Yes. Ditto, Stephen. Seconder, Pauline. All those in favour? Fantastic. And Prue, are you abstaining? Super. And last one, 24th of March. And is it now? We've got another one. Oh yeah, we've got 30th of March. Have we got any questions about 24th of March? Stephen
But I'll propose that we
proposing.
accept them. Yeah.
Hey, Prue seconding. All those in favour? Anybody against? And anyone abstaining?
That's pulling wrong.
And this one is the last one, 30th of March. Any questions?
No question.
No.
No question.
Proposed by Stephen,
Proposed,
seconded by Pauline, and all those in favour? Super. And one abstention from Lindsay. Thank you very much. There is a lot to get through, so if we can keep up this pace, that would be absolutely brilliant. Okay, so do we have any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Public question time. Do we have any public questions? Member question time. Do we have any member questions? No. Okay, so we've got quite a lot on the rest of the agenda. Louise has been with us now for a bit over 6 months. She has been incredibly busy. She's been going through a process of looking at all of our HR practices and looking at how we can bring some real strategic direction to HR and link it in with the goals of the council. The first building block of this is a people strategy, which is going to be the first one that we go through tonight. We've then got a number of other issues that we want to talk through. A number of these are at the concept stage to give Louise the green light, hopefully, to go ahead with developing and coming back to us as a personnel board. And I'm hoping that the detailed discussions of that will be when Louise comes back with those. But do you want to talk us through, Louise, item number 8, which is development of the council's people strategy?
Thank you, Chair. So good evening, councillors. So this is the development of the council's people strategy. As I say, we haven't actually developed it yet, but what we want to do, obviously, as a key partner in that strategy, we need to make sure that we come to Personnel Board, firstly, just to let you know that's what we're doing and for what purpose, what engagement we're looking to do, which also will include councillors, and then we'll bring first draft back to you, and then obviously final draft for sign-off. Just with regard to its aim, obviously the people strategy is sort of about helping to set the direction for our workforce, but obviously also that then connects to what we're also developing around our community vision and our council plan, so that we then get that golden thread going through the organisation into individuals' objectives. And this is why it's really important that we engage with our workforce, so that when we develop this strategy, they recognise it and they see the words that they clearly obviously adopt, etc., and actually as part of their working day. So we've got some different ideas in here about what we're going to do, different areas that would be included around performance, leadership, investment in people, organisational behaviours, how we engage, well-being, reward, employer brand, inclusivity are just some of the areas that we're setting out. But that's just really the framework that we start with. It's the words that we want to see that them develop. We've also, as I say, set out a number of engagement tools that we're going to use, so a number of meetings where we'll cascade through the organisation. And as I say, we would like to include Personnel Board with some of that. So again, we'll come back to you with regard to just getting your engagement and thoughts on content. Please don't get me wrong, and I just mean this is people strategies. It's not about reinventing the wheel, and we're not looking for a lengthy document, but what we want is a document that is owned by Wokingham, and Wokingham can see what it is trying to achieve for its staff. And I think that's what's really important when we develop this strategy. So just with timings, just to finish, I think we've stated that we'll come back in September with an update. But in between that time, we'll be contacting you maybe outside of personnel boards, just with regard to getting your thoughts, with the view of a final version coming back into board in November. And that's the timeline that we're looking to work towards. Just so you know, I am also working with Jackie Whitney and Emily Higson, who are obviously developing the community vision and the council plan. And that's me just wanting to set that out before you. And if you have any questions, I'm very happy to pick them up. Thank you, Chair.
Great. It's not a question as much as a comment. There's a hint in here that you're going to develop a strategy on a page. And I would really applaud that initiative, because it actually means that people are likely to read it and take it in. So please do that. And I look forward to seeing that, because I think it will be very helpful.
Pauline.
Question really. What's the scope of this? Is it employees? Does it include other sorts of people that are around the, i.e. contractors, all that sort of thing?
It's mainly our actual workforce, but we will also want to talk to obviously Optalis, for example, one of our partners and our partners, because we deliver through them as well. So it's making sure that we also engage with them, so that it's not just something that's sort of closed within the council.
And following on from that, I was wondering if you should have something in here related to sourcing strategy as well as all the other things. You know, where you want to use permanent staff, where you don't want to use permanent staff. I think some thoughts about that would be useful.
I think what I haven't done is probably set out that from the people strategy, where we'll try and keep it quite succinct, we'll then have a very clear action plan that then sits beneath that. And I think, yes, Councillor, I agree with you. We can then be very specific then around a number of these items about the direction, because whilst I want to capture that strategy on one page, there's a lot more that will sit underneath it and that we'll be exploring here at Personnel Board as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, speaking from experience, if you don't have that, then people go and do what they think is right, and you end up with you can end up with your people in the wrong place. So you've got the right number of people, but they're not doing the right jobs, that sort of thing.
And hopefully one of the things that we'll be talking about a little bit later tonight is some of the work that you've been doing to make sure that we have some really good, strong controls over recruitment. Yeah. Stephen.
Thanks very much, Rachel. This is very encouraging, Louise. I'm delighted to see it. I'm particularly delighted to see that you're taking into account the community vision work and the partnership working that's integral to community vision. And obviously partnership working goes well beyond the community vision. And you refer at various points to the culture of the organisation. They need to shift the culture. And if we are going to make the very most of the opportunities for partnership working, that's going to be necessary. It's got to be a bit, in some areas of the council, it's going to have to need to be perhaps a new and more well-developed awareness of the need to work with external partners in a productive way. So I think this is a great position to be starting from. And this is really just a document that sets out the principles of what you're going to do. Obviously, we will wait to see what it is you're actually going to do in the future. But thank you very much for this. I think it's a great start, and we can, I think, approve this very happily.
Yes. I'd like to ask a question from not being a councillor, but what would we be seeing? No, but I mean, as the staff, what is it that what the two aspects, what is it we're going to look for from the staff, and what do we look for from the staff? So I'm looking at it from all our employees, all our people, as to what is it they're going to benefit from and how they will do it. So we can look at it from one side, but I'd like to see what we're going to look for from the other side.
So if I'm answering this correctly, but please point me to say if I'm not. So for staff, what they're seeing is what is, how are we going to develop our staff? So we make commitments to them with regard to how we may look at career development, training. We've got lots of opportunities within the council where we can grow our own. So I think that's very much at the heart of what we're looking to do. Then if we look at reward, say, for example, it's looking at having a transparent process so people can see how jobs are graded, for example, how salaries are set. So again, it's setting out almost what things will look like for them, so they can almost say, I suppose, hold us to account a little bit with regard to then what we then. Yes. Yeah, transparency, and yeah, absolutely. And I think for them, that then means that from a retention perspective and then recruitment, you start to then build your brand and you change your culture and it becomes positive. You'll then look for then the values you then expect back from your staff. So you have a set of values, which we have in the organisation already, but I think it's making sure that's better known, and that's sort of something that rolls off the tongue a little bit more with regard to for Wokingham. So for me, it's then having a motivated workforce that then delivers for the needs of its community. I know it sounds a lot, but it's so really important. So.
Thank you. I wonder if I can add to what Louise has just said, in that something that I'm a big fan of is being clear on rights and responsibilities. So going back to your point then about Lindsay, about the two-way process. So it's about how we articulate that as well, where we're saying to staff, yeah, these are your rights as such, but then you have responsibilities in return. So I think there's something that we can either do as part of this strategy or separately, which articulates that clearly in very succinct way. Because as I say, I'm a big fan of that. Thank you.
Are there any final questions, or do we need to vote on that for that to go through, Louise? Consideration. Fantastic. Okay. Agree. Okay. So proposed by Stephen, seconded by, I think Pauline was first there. All those in favour? Yes, so that's everybody in favour. Thank you, and that's a great piece of work. We look forward to seeing what you do over the summer when you come back in September. So I think the next point 9, is the modern workforce concepts, which is really another strategic document, looking at how we take the ways of working which developed over the pandemic, look at what the council needs to do as an organisation to deliver best to the residents that we serve, and look at where that opens up opportunities for people to work flexibly. Stephen, you've got a question already on that?
Yeah, that's really, maybe I should have allowed Louise to present first, but on the potential principles, I was wondering whether we at that, in this document as well as in the previous one, might need to make some explicit reference to partnership working, because it does seem that is going to be a very important part of a modern workforce concept.
I think that's a very good idea. So if we can add that in, and do you want to talk through what your plan is with this piece of work, Louise?
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually going to hand this to our lead business partner, Sally Halliwell, just to introduce this item.
Thank you. So the modern workforce is about this framework that we would have in place, and it's ensuring that whilst we've got the element of focusing on the staff, it's making sure that the customers remain and our residents remain at the heart of everything we do. So the principles and that we've laid out are all about the customer and colleague experience, but allowing that flexibility that we have naturally over the course of the pandemic started to see. I think we're still delivering amazing services, and it's almost cementing and finalising that properly for the organisation. I think it's really important that we do that for the workforce, but always having the customer and residents at the heart of everything we do, along with the community vision. It also would allow us to broaden our sort of net when we look at recruitment. So we struggle quite significantly for certain roles, but we understand that there are certain roles that can work in different ways. And it's that one size doesn't fit all approach. So it would be very service orientated. So what would work in social care would be very different from a HR perspective. And it will allow us to also, from a local talent market as well, have that flexibility, thinking maybe about getting people back to work that ordinarily would want some flexibility, and typically the old ways of working wouldn't allow it. And it's linked into a lot of things. It's linked into other initiatives such as looking at accommodation and our car parking and how we all do that. So this would then, so you've got the residents and the community as the nucleus of this and remaining at the centre, but then this would be integral to everything else that we do moving forward. So I think we've identified some worker styles, but I think it's been very clear that we're a really diverse council with what we deliver. So that one size does not fit all approach. So we would then engage again with staff, with assistant directors, and you could have variations across a complete directorate where you would have a mix of work styles, but it would be very driven. It's not about us coming out as HR and saying, you will do this. It's engaging with staff and the relevant services about it. And it's also part of the vision is having some principles about work-life balance, but also approach to meetings to make sure that we're giving the work-life balance and we're not back-to-back in calls continually. So it's just building in some of that framework too.
concept workforce.
Of course you can. Absolutely.
Pauline, you want to ask a question?
I was a little bit worried about the third bullet down in benefits. Now, I'm actually quite a fan of home working, but the impression it gives that when it says colleagues will have the flexibility of when, how, and where they work, the wording gives the impression that the colleague is the person who's going to make the decision, and I don't think that's actually right. It's just the way it's worded. I don't think that's how you intend it to be either. I've seen agile working where we've had workers that work for the council in Glasgow, for example, and it really drags out the problems waiting for them to be next in the office when they need to be facing the customer. And it seemed to get to the point where it was the individual's choice about whether they came in rather than the need of the business. And I just think that wording makes it feel too much. It's the individual's choice.
No, and I think, yeah, so we can tweak the wording in it. So obviously it's the concept that we're bringing in tonight. So it's a valid point there. I think we would be very clear that it's about the needs of the organisation. So if your role does lend itself to working further afield, there would still be that expectation that you needed to be here as and when required by the business. And again, I don't live, as an example, I don't live locally, but I do travel when I'm required to be here. So it does lend itself to certain roles, but we can tweak the wording to ensure that, you can't be a social worker living in Scotland, for an example, because you could be needed immediately to respond to something. So it is tailoring it to suit the service. It is the tone, that's fine. We can, as I say, it's a concept which we can amend before we go out further.
And I would agree that I think that's going to be one of the most important things to clarify so that managers don't get caught up in conversations with staff. We need to be very clear from the start. Were you wanting to add to that, Susan? Yeah. Super. Okay. Now, I didn't see whether Lindsay or Stephen's hand went up first there, but we got Lindsay and then we got Stephen through. Lindsay first.
I echo what Pauline said, because that was the point I was going to raise. I have picked up some sort of areas of conflict of certain staff, particularly those who are located quite a long way away. One who was in Scotland. And it makes it quite difficult to manage services, because that far away, the perception is that they're not going to be around. So I think we need to allow that flexibility, but not over egg it. It needs to be within a framework, and it to be understood on both parties what is going. And I think that's one of the things I've got. And I think we're still learning. With the changes that come from the pandemic, you can see a difference. And I go down to the railway station at Twyford regularly. Mondays, the car park is half full. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's packed. Friday, it's a quarter full. So people are changing their working habits. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're only working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because it could be they're doing Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. But there are differences, and it's definitely changed. And I think that flexibility is great. I think things like Teams has helped. I have to say that there's some committees that you get on a November evening, drive all the way down from Twyford to be on the committee where you could go online and still participate, but not move. And not have to move is a positive, and I think. But so it has to be a balance. But if it's one way and the other, and it's too much, so if we have a member of staff who I will not come in, and you've got to have a balance, and rigidity the other way, where you must be in all the time. Now that I think we've got to find that balance, and I think that's what really we're saying, because it's difficult, and I think as time goes by, all authorities and all councils and all companies are going to find a happy medium for what works for it. And there will be, I accept, different roles which would be greater to be more flexible. than others, where particularly if we adult social services or children's services, they're going to need to have more involvement with people, but there still needs to be that flexibility. And I think that needs to be clear.
Shall I let Sally? You looked as if you were very much wanting to reply on that. Do you want to give a response? And then, Pauline, was your point directly related to what Stephen was saying? Yes.
So if you want to.
The only thing I was going to say is that I think if you get the wrong impression to start off with, what happens sometimes is even if the individual was willing to travel, the manager doesn't like to ask them, and then it's unfair on the ones that are closer as well. So it's not just always the individual. Sometimes, oh, we can't ask John, he's in Glasgow, we'll get such and such to do it because he lives around the corner. Yeah.
So I think we are agreed that the needs of the council and the residents are absolutely paramount in the design of this, that very clear communication right from the start is going to be essential. And that's something that you're going to be very much building into the design of the piece of work that you're doing now.
Absolutely. So it's recognising that there would be a bank of information with the overarching concepts. So if we get the approval, we would then be producing supplementary documentation, and that's already starting to be drafted. So it's how do we deal with that scenario where somebody is in Glasgow and is refusing to come into the office? There's a contractor will be part of it built into contracts as well, that there is an expectation that they're required to attend. So, and that's the variation of the worker styles also. So we know there are roles that absolutely need to be here. So from a customer service point of view, having somebody at the front desk's vital to the council for the face of, for the public coming in. So there will be it set out contractually and clear guidance for employees and managers as to expectations, but also that support for managers in terms of managing those scenarios. So if you have got somebody refusing to come into the office and their contract variation is very clear that that's what they've signed up to, then we would deal that through natural HR processes in terms of it, but also from a recruitment perspective. When we are recruiting, we will be clear about the worker styles, and it would be discussed at the point of recruitment. So if you have got somebody applying for that role that lives in Scotland, we would be very clear about expectations, and that's naturally already happening through some conversations we're having with recruiting managers. So they are already saying, well, I've got somebody that's applied that lives up in Shropshire. So the response is, well, you need to test that they understand they have to be in the office 2 days a week, and it is their responsibility to ensure that they're here. So it is already happening, and the framework that would go with this would just cement all of that further information and cover all that off.
Super. Stephen.
My point is perhaps a slightly different one. Interestingly enough, there is, I think, an advantage when it comes to attending committee meetings for staff members to attend when they can, so they can actually get to know who the councillors are and work with them more effectively. I think that is a positive. And on the planning committee, when I was on it in the last year, Brian Conlon has really encouraged, I don't know whether it's simply encouraged or he's told them, some of the younger planning officers that they should come along when they're presenting, because they will get to know how the committee works better if they can see it in person than online. And in fact, the main point I really wanted to make was it is good to have some flexibility. We've all assumed for now that the preference of many people would be to work at home. But there is a cohort of people, and they're mainly, but not exclusively, younger people, for whom coming into the office and meeting other people and socialising with your colleagues is important, particularly for younger people. And I think there's a danger of some people working at home feeling very isolated. So yes, allowing the flexibility is good, but we do, and I think everybody's agreed, we do need to make sure that everybody is given flexibilities, as much flexibility as the nature of their job and their responsibilities allows.
I think it's important as well. So when I first joined, it's about that team building as well. So as a head of a big team now, it's important for me, and I've set the expectation out with the team that they will be required. So it's not that they're sat at home for 6 months on end and they don't just stay there, that we would have regular meetings, so they're clear planned meetings, so we're having that opportunity to socialise and discuss. We've had a workshop this afternoon with the team and they've all been present. There's been no resistance to coming in, and it goes back towards that education, the education for managers in how to deal with the scenario, but also the staff and the expectations that they would have. They would have clear packs. It wouldn't be a policy or a strategy that goes in and it's there. We would be physically consulting with all the staff teams over the proposed changes as well.
And just to add, just very quickly, because mental health obviously comes into that. And so obviously we're not there to force isolation for people. So where a worker style for a particular job may be that it's to be at home, we're not looking at forcing that situation. If the person wants to be here, we'd rather they are and they get that sort of, because again, that comes back to our brand and everything about the experience for the employee.
Now, I think, Prue, you had your hand up earlier, and then Lindsay, you wanted to speak again.
My point is completely different. So if Lindsay's got something on the same point, I'm quite happy to go after him.
Mine is on the same point, but mine's on when it comes to the recommendation, and that is that I think we need to refer to this discussion with when we do the recommendation, because I think when it just says agree the concept, I think we need to indicate that we've raised an issue, particularly it probably well-being and flexibility is probably the two areas most affected, I suspect. And I think that we need to draw attention to this discussion, that's what we would like. I think that's the area that I think needs beefing up.
So got a number of different points. What the first and the shortest is that obviously if you're giving this amount of flexibility about whether you're in the office or not in the office, planning the size of the workplace is going to be extremely difficult. So I'd like that, like that borne in mind, that we have adequate workspace for what we require. My other point was completely different. It may be that the things I'm going to mention are outside the scope of this. And if they are outside the scope, say where they are in scope, because they need to be covered by something. So I'm thinking about people that are not traditional employees, and I don't mean contract staff by that, because you've got a method at the moment of developing short-term contracts and employing temporary staff. I'm thinking about other concepts. So how we do apprenticeships, how we do interns, how we do work experience, how we get people with disabilities into the office to at least give them some sort of work experience, and volunteers, because I'm not ruling out that we may have to have a partly voluntary workforce in some of our areas. For example, if we were to have some community hubs out there somewhere, there might well be a voluntary presence that helps, I was going to say man them, that would be terrible. Oh, wash my mouth out. Helps provide the workforce there. So yes, helps deliver. Yes. So it's a kind of development of the partnership thing. So all of those kinds of things need to be included somewhere. And I don't know whether they're in the scope of this or not.
They are absolutely are. Because obviously, again, with everything that we're doing at the moment, we're looking at our development opportunities, and we want to attract, I'm going to say young, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a young apprentice, but we need to know that they're going to get the right experience. There's also new things like T-levels that are coming in where work experience is needed. So again, I think this is all part of that bigger picture. Because we do have work experience, school, and college students coming in now, and we make it work because our teams absolutely know they have to be in the office to be able to give that the experience and get it right. So I think what I suppose I'm saying in a very long-winded way is that our L&D team are absolutely connected into this, and when we go out and consult, we will be talking to them about all of these types of things, because we don't want it to impede that growth and development. It's very important that it's part of it. And it is that thing of, and I appreciate sometimes when you look at words on a piece of paper, it almost looks like we're just letting staff allow them to do what they, because it's not, we absolutely aren't. The managers, this is actually about a little bit of us taking back some control, actually, because at the minute we're not stipulating actually what you need to do. And what we want to do is put the controls back in to help manage where these different things, but also know that we want to develop our work experience opportunities. We want to develop our apprenticeship. So absolutely take on board absolutely what you say, and that's part of it. And just on the other point about accommodation, we are talking to the assistant director, Sarah Morgan. So we're not doing this in isolation. We're absolutely working with her so that as we develop and do the consultation, she's part of those conversations, and not, it's not, not being done without them understanding what we're doing. Because again, we can't go against, obviously, then other bigger concepts. It's the macro, not the micro.
Super. And Pauline.
Thank you. It's related to Prue's point about properties, actually. I happen to be looking at the car park signage for this car park, which is being proposed in the next few weeks. And I was horrified to see that the annual staff permit was £950, which is a heck of a lot for somebody that may be relatively low paid and is only going to be working here 2 days a week. And I think you need to join up your people strategy with your parking strategy.
Oh, sorry. Car parking is a heavy feature in the modern workforce. So along with the accommodation, we're talking with the car parking teams, and actually a decision's been made with George now that the review is due to finish at the end of June, and it's then can't get my words out. The permit situation was due to end at the end of June, but CLT have agreed to extend it with no time limit to allow for the modern workforce to happen. So with the car parking permits, it will be modelled based in with the modern workforce based on worker styles. So absolutely take on board what you're saying is that £950 if somebody's only actually needing to come in once a month is a lot of money. So we will work that through. So along with accommodation, there's the car parking, health and safety are involved in it. IT also looking at what's the right equipment based on what your worker styles are. So it's all coming together really, and having a bit of a working group on that.
So I was quite surprised to see the price of staff permits on the sign. It might be a good idea if you got rid of it. It's actually in writing on the proposed sign.
I didn't realise it was.
I think you might want to delete it.
I will pick that up with George. Okay.
Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much. So, do we have any final questions, or are we happy to agree that we have the right concepts here for Louise and Sally to take forward and develop? Subject to the comments raised, and I think we have noted those down, and we will make sure when this comes back to the personnel board that we do include a discussion of those.
Absolutely. I think as well, sorry, there's something I wanted. We will be creating a load of visuals as well. So a day in the life of a social worker, and it will talk about what their role does and how this modern workforce concept would apply to them. And there'll also be work-life balance principles as well. So those visuals will be made up, and the images will be shared as part of when we come back to board before we go back out. Okay.
So we have Stephen is proposing second.
You're right. You're right, I am.
Could I just be clear that the paper, which we had some comments on, doesn't get divorced from the comments and give the impression that we agree completely with the way the paper's worded, that's all.
I think that's the point Lindsay was making, and I think we have had the assurance that all of these will be taken into account. It's going to be another iteration, several more, and we'll see them. No. Okay.
So proposed with that very important caveat by Stephen, seconded by Lindsay. All those in favour? Super. So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Now, as somebody who's an HR manager in my day job, the next one is very dear to my heart. Louise, when she joined us, spotted that we could make a significant improvement in our policies by formal management policy. Absence is obviously one of our KPIs, and it's important that you do have a fair policy so that staff who are off sick are fairly treated, but also so that the council can manage situations where absence starts to become prolonged or frequent, and what we're delivering to residents starts to suffer as a result of that. So, Louise, would you like to introduce? Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. I think we'll do this as a double act, just so you know. Yes, absence management policy and concept. So just to say, there is guidance in place for our managers, but what we want to do is tighten up and get some more specific procedures set in place, just to help with the managing of the process. And that is for both sides. It's just to stop ambiguity and to be quite clear on what our expectations are. I think one of the key things that we're looking at in here is we are looking at setting some trigger points into our policy so that we can start to look at patterns. And again, it's informing our managers when these sorts of things are happening. Now, all of these subjects are connected, because as you say, if we're managing a modern workforce, then we do need to be watching, obviously, from our absence management, but we also need to have a clear policy for our long-term absence as well. Again, sort of defining what that actually is, so that again, it triggers when we will start to have conversations with people. Now, please don't get me wrong, we are there to support our staff, especially when they are ill. This policy helps us to manage that process, and unfortunately at times it can mean, in the very worst case scenarios, that we end up managing maybe somebody out of the organisation, that may be through ill health retirement, or capability just with regards to the fact that they can't do the role any longer. But I think what's really important is that we have this policy in place. We train our managers so that, again, they're confident with it. And I just want to I'm going to hand over to Sally just with regard to any extra things she just wants to point out.
Yeah,
what we're looking at.
I think, again, it's in the absence of an absence policy at the moment, it's making it hard for managers to deal with absence management. But I think that there needs to be a transparent policy there, so that the employee understands their obligations when they're off and well, but also there's clear expectations of a manager's obligation as to how to manage that. It's also looking at how we can support, so it's through occupational health, looking at more detail, so the quality we get quality information back, more detailed training for managers, clearer guidance on just general things about time off for appointments. Yes, we're flexible, but there is that, do they have the right to have that time off automatically? So it's a lot of that, really, just clearing all of that up, and it's set out within the key highlights. But I think at the moment there are certain areas that are struggling with some of their situations because of the financial pressures. So we then have somebody off long term, we then have to backfill sometimes through agency, which increases our agency cost. And by having this policy in place, it will allow us to manage firmly but fairly, and set out better processes and expectations of both parties.
Super, thank you. I think we've got Prue and then Lindsay.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, and I'm not an HR professional, so you'll have to excuse me. Some of these are covered by the law, but I don't know. So I'm thinking about absences which are not sickness absences. So, for example, bereavements and those kind of things, and absence without pay for particular things. If there was a particular project somebody wanted to do, those kind of things, or we've had a member of staff who's gone off to do some further education work, those kind of things. Is all that going to be covered in there? And will there be, I'd like there to be the ability for some managers to have some discretion, but it's how you control that. So that's the but it's not, I'm thinking about the the bereavement, for example, or adoption, or those kind of things. That's the first half of it. The second half is I don't want to go too much the other way and have people coming into work when they're infectious with something. And what are you doing to stop that?
Yeah, so if I just go back through, so the bereavement unpaid absence would feature within a separate policy. So this is completely about absence when you're unwell from work. And what the vision is to have something probably called like
We had a special leave
policy,
policy.
cover bereavement, any caring leave, because there's some new legislation that's just gone through Parliament and it's all been passed. Time off, unpaid time off, all of that would feature within a separate policy, and we would make sure that that's all detailed, so it wouldn't be recorded as sickness absence. We would record it, but it wouldn't fall within the monitoring process of the absence. And yeah, that's one of the next policies to come through with all of that. And what was it?
It was about not coming in when you were unwell, and
it would be covered. That would be covered off within it as well, because we have to be really mindful of not spreading anything that's infectious. So again, we would have a section within the policy that would detail how we would handle that situation. So if they came in, the manager would reserve that right and have that discretion to send that person home, and we would manage it accordingly within the framework.
obviously the fact their commitment, we're not, so at the end of the day we're obviously understanding that commitment, but obviously just wanting to make sure that, as you just said, it's for the right reasons. And again, back to the health and well-being point of that being at the centre of what we're doing.
Richard. Super, thanks. I think we've got Lindsay and then Stuart and then Stephen and then Pauline.
Oh, it's nice to hear from Stuart. I think this is exceedingly important. I think this is an area that the council has been rather inconsistent over a number of years. In my previous role, I did get a number of people come up to me and have raised concerns, and they weren't all in the union, some were. So I think this is something that we need to build on, because we did have some issues. And there isn't a mention of disabilities in here, but there's I couldn't see it if it is. And we did have a number of instances of where we had problems, and I don't think the council did very well. And so I think that there's been inconsistency. So anything that can enable this to be clarified, and so that both sides can understand the situation, I think is excellent.
Just there is a section at the beginning of it, it does cover off complying with the Equality Act. So we have to make sure that the policy complies. We do have to look at reasonable adjustments. So we want that consistent approach. I facilitated a workshop with a number of managers, just to understand how they were feeling about the absence of an absence policy. And they were talking through the fact that they felt they weren't able to progress things as well as they could have done. But from an employee perspective as well, they were sort of saying, well, we feel like we're missing certain bits and that clear guidance on how to report, and what happens if you don't report, or what happens if we don't hear from you. So the frustrations and the concerns that were given by that cohort of staff was actually stuff we'd already captured within the draft. So the next step is, after today, is to go out to consult, look at the draft policy, and then come back with a full policy to you. But it's quite a detailed policy, but that is because we need to be transparent, consistent, and both parties understand what their commitments are when they're engaged in contract of employment with us.
Super. And I think we've got Stuart next.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry, I keep dropping in out of this meeting. I don't know why. It must be on my internet. And I think quite a lot of what I'm about to say has been actually answered. Are you saying that there is no policy at all at the moment, that this is the beginning of one? Because if you are, then wholly behind it. Let's get something that everybody understands, because if there isn't any rules, then nobody can do anything.
Yes, there is absolutely no policy. There is some guidance in place, but it doesn't help services or employees either, because it's quite loose guidance. So it's really important that we get this policy through. So there is a draft in place, and the next step after tonight is to go out to consult and bring it back. The final sign off. We're aiming to bring it back in July. We want to work that quickly with it, really.
Good, thank you.
That's brilliant. I think reflects the importance of this policy for the workforce and for managers. Stephen, I think you were next.
Thank you. I won't detain us for long. I think this is very, very important. Long overdue in many ways that we have this policy, so I'm delighted that we are going to have it. It will give clarity to both managers and their employees. Crucially, it'll help us in some cases, I suspect, to pick up perhaps rather earlier than we might have done that somebody has a serious problem. They're struggling. Sickness, absence may be a sign of not coping with their work, not coping with the job they've been allocated, and it gives the opportunity to try and find out whether there's a different way of approaching things that might help them overcome their difficulties. So I think it's an unalloyed good thing. So keep going. Thank you.
Super, thank you. And that's something that I would very much be hoping to see, is that it's in the policy when you bring it back to us, that we will have a sympathetic conversation with people, and if there are things that we can do to help get them back to work, or to get them back to work in a reliable way, that we provide that support where it's reasonable and appropriate for us to do that. And Susan, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I was just thinking about a practical example. So domestic abuse is an example where someone might be missing work or have performance issues as well, and where just later, Chair.
Super, that's a really good example. Thank you very much, Susan. And then I think finally we have Pauline.
Thank you. I've got a bit of experience of implementing a triggers-based absence management system. Just a couple of thoughts. First experience I had was don't make it too complicated. If you make it too complicated, people actually won't use it. It has to ultimately lead to either dismissal or something like that if it gets too far. So you need to be very clear about that. I wondered if you've got any sort of thought about any sort of system or IT for detecting pattern absence. I mean, I know it's easier here than it would be with 26,000 cabin crew, but and finally, I think it's quite important to have management discretion for terminal or serious illness, so that you can discount things rather than having to drag somebody who is seriously ill through a set of return to work interviews and all that sort of stuff when they don't need it. What they need is a bit of support. And I agree with the disability point as well.
There will be a terminal illness section in there. For some recent case examples that we've had, we've recognised again through the lack of a clear policy how we actually support people. If they're in a treatment plan, it's looking at what can we do more to make sure that they're not having to worry about work when they're going through treatment or anything, so that there is a section on that. And then in terms of patterns and how we capture it, we're speaking to the team that look after our BWOR system, and there is a module in there that will allow us to report accurately. So it would be based on work patterns as well. So we wouldn't have everyone being down as a Monday to Friday worker, because if we did that, then it would be unfair on a part-time worker. So we need to build all the work patterns in as well.
I don't expect that to be particularly. I tried to implement one of them once, and it took about 9 months with very weird working patterns, so it's not easy.
No,
yours might be simpler.
I think once we've got the builder in, it should be able to, and the team are confident that they can produce the reports for us. For patterns, we would then, from the data reporting, be able to identify if everyone was having a Monday off or a Friday off, or if they were then having every school holiday off unwell, claiming that they're unwell. We would deal with the patterns that way as well.
We had problems because people were 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, strange patterns, flying patterns, all sorts of stuff, and it was quite difficult to work out when they should be in work to then put the analytics on it. But hopefully it'll be simpler than that.
We're hopeful with the way that with the services that we're delivering, particularly, that it should be straightforward once we've got the work patterns into the system. So we're comfortable working with the relevant teams.
Super, thank you very much. And I think Lindsay and then Stephen.
Just picked up on terminal illness. It isn't necessarily terminal. I've written long COVID down because we don't know about the impact of that. Dare I say menopause? Because I had seen a colleague who was working well and then basically fell apart and it wasn't recognised, and that was the problem. And I think that's quite common. And I think that there's other illnesses. So it isn't just, you said a terminal illness. I can understand a terminal illness. Terminal illness is going to be how long you can carry on until the dreaded day comes and then you have to leave. But there's going to be, and I think in particular along COVID, we don't know what that is. It does seem to be quite a large number of people who are suffering it, and it's lethargy, lack of power, all sorts of things that generate somebody pretty difficult to do their job. And we need to work out how we deal with that. And I think that's probably one of the things that's coming out of the pandemic that we're going to have to deal with in some way or form.
Just coming back on that very point, obviously what we want to do is work with our employees and help them, and this is where our occupational health, which I think Sally mentioned, is where we would absolutely be making sure that we get that feedback from an expert with regard to what is going on. Again, it is very individual. It is very individual. We're not looking to penalise our staff, but at the same time, we've got to make sure that we have a workforce that's able to obviously do the role that they need to do. But please be rest assured, we would be absolutely working with our employees to help them get back to where they need to get to and give them that opportunity. And we take the point about not it being necessarily terminal, but actually where those illnesses are for a long period of time, and that we've got to maybe look at adjustments. We may look for a different job. We may look at shorter contracts and all of those types of things. So all of those things would be looked at to help the individual and making sure they've got the right support, maybe union, whatever it is. So again, that they've got that assistance, but it's absolutely noted.
Super, thank you. And did you have a question, or were you going to propose that we
accept the report and thank Sally and Louise for developing this much needed policy?
Super, thank you very much. Do we have a seconder? Pauline, all those in favour? Okay, that's brilliant. And so that's unanimous again. So the next one is the Gender and Ethnicity Pay Gap Report. This is a report that we need to do as a large employer, and it's simply a statutory, from the point of view of gender, it's a statutory requirement, and because of we have taken on the responsibility of publishing an ethnicity pay gap report because of standards that we have signed up to. So do you want to talk us through this very quickly, Louise?
It is a technical report and we are required to do it, as thank you, Chair. So absolutely. I firstly just want to make a small apology to Personnel Board. This is an old report because it is set at March 2022. I'm afraid it's fallen through the gap and didn't make it to an earlier Personnel Board. So I do apologise for that. It did go through our systems internally and then somewhere got lost, I think, when I started. So I firstly want to apologise for that, which is why I make the commitment for the 2023 that will come to September's Personnel Board. So I just want to be absolutely upfront about that. We have therefore needed to publish this report because we are legally required to. We would have brought it to our March Personnel Board, but just things, pre-election period, etc. That Personnel Board didn't take place. So I apologise for that, but let's get to the point, Louise. So the gender pay gap versus equal pay. This is not an equal pay report. The gender pay gap, just to be quite clear, is a measure of the difference between the average earnings of men and women across an organisation, and it's expressed as a percentage of men's earnings. in comparison. So just going to obviously what our actual gender pay gap is, it's actually 14.07% is the mean gender pay gap currently. It has dropped slightly from 2021. So that means that on average, men earn 14.07% more than women in the council. Now, there is a lot of detail in this report. It sets out about the different quartiles of where men and women are employed and the types of roles that they are employed in. Obviously, with regard to the inclusivity work that we're doing, can't get my word out, apologies. We will be looking at all opportunities where we are looking to attract male and female into all roles and at all levels through our recruitment processes with regards to this. But it's quite a difficult one to change. It's something that specific roles attract specific genders. It tends to be, we can break the stereotype, and I'm very happy to break that stereotype wherever we can. But yeah, I think I just really wanted to sort of just set that out. And just to be quite clear, as you state, the ethnicity pay gap is 2.25%. So that is lower, and that we do make that commitment, obviously, through our charter. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Great. Let's start with a sort of statement and then a question. There is a question in it. So it strikes me that we have the same sort of problem that primary schools have, which is that most of the workforce is female, but somehow all the primary heads are men. Well, not all of them, but that's where the men work. They're not in the teaching roles. They're actually at the top of the organisation, and I don't know what we can do about that. I think some of it's historical, because the higher paid roles will go to people with more experience, and women have, there's a sort of drag on women reaching that stage. Susan accepted, or it's getting better. It does feel like it's getting better, but it's still a bit of a stereotype. So the question that I've got really is: are other councils doing better than us, or are we doing okay? And do you think there's anything else we could do to make the gap smaller?
I suppose I moved here recently. I joined on the 1st of February, and I think it's probably similar. I think there could be, I suppose it's how we market ourselves, looking at apprenticeships. We're having discussions about careers fairs and trying to encourage typically females that would not come into something like building control or planning, which is, again, the stereotypical. It's about opening what we can offer as a council to try and increase that, quantity surveying and showcasing what we can do. I think compared to my previous council, I think it is similar, just because purely of what we deliver. If you think of care, you think typically that it's delivered by females. And it is that, or, we talk about waste, it's predominantly a male orientated, and it's how we go out in future and look at when we're growing and trying to recruit the next generation, being clear that there's no barriers to you being a female in a male typical world, and vice versa. I don't see a difference. Would you?
No, I think actually from a role model point of view, at the top of our organisation, as you say, we have a female chief executive. We have directors as females as well. It's just, as I say, we've got to keep encouraging. I think it's that unconscious bias as well. So we're looking at that, and we're doing a lot of training around job evaluation. We'll be looking at job evaluation, and all of that comes into the roles. Now, as I say, unconscious bias is an important one, and again, it's just making sure that our managers think about some of those points when we are recruiting, and we need to help them to ensure that we're being neutral from that point of view.
And it's not just recruiting, it's perhaps promotion within the organisation. This is merely an example, but I can think of two very impressive female officers in highways who, in many ways, I'm quite surprised are not higher up in highways. So maybe sometimes this is an unconscious bias when it comes to promotion as well as recruitment. And I think perhaps that's something we might want to address as well.
So I think that's a really good point. I think we've got Lindsay and then Pauline. And then I propose that we move forward with this.
Yes, I've suffered bias with my Christian name. And I applied for jobs and I dear Muz back. No. So didn't read my CV, did you? So I felt this very personally all my life, but I'm determined to keep my name. The problem I have is that this is about the sixth one of these I've seen. I've been on the personnel board for a few years. I think I was on 6 from 2016. And they're all very similar. And to be honest, it means absolutely to me. Sorry, it doesn't mean anything. Because the real issue is the gender pay gap issue, is the salaries of the people in the same roles. And providing the council is dealing with that, then I'm much happier. The point that Stephen raised is hidden within this document, because there are parts of the council which are, adult social services and children's services, predominantly female. There are other areas which are predominantly male, and I suspect we'll be here in 10 years or 20 years' time, and it probably won't be that much different. There may be a little bit of overlap, but there will be elements of what Stephen's mentioned, where somebody's trying to break in. When I was doing physics back in all my young days, there were 25 of us and there were 3 women. Nowadays, if you did a physics course, you'll find it is much nearer. Still probably a bit balanced, but be 60-40. But that is the sort of thing that's going to need to be managed. And I don't find that in this document. It's obviously a prescribed structure. And to be honest, I read it and I get to the bottom of what does 14.05% mean? And to me, it means nothing. And it doesn't, and the 1.08% difference shows you I've read the numbers. The doesn't mean anything. So I have a problem because I suspect it's a national document structure. Well, but I agree that it's where we are, but that's just my observation. And that's because I've been on personnel board for too long.
I have to say, I completely agree with the style of the report. I haven't actually written this report. I've picked this report up. It's fine in the fact that it's the content. It's just very technically written. And I think there's a lot of information in it which switches you off before you've even got to page 2. And what I would like to do is when we come back, the style will be completely different. I'm quite used to, and there are some diagrams in here, but it's pictorial, that we actually demonstrate our data pictorially. But then what are we going to do about it? So what, it's some of that sort of needs to be in the report. So I absolutely take on board what you're saying, and I hope to prove to you that you will see a different style when we return with this particular report, because it needs to mean something. And I appreciate it is a technical report that we have to do, but it's also then, well, what are we doing about it, and what difference are we trying to make? It shouldn't just be a lot of words on a piece of paper. So yeah, I take your point, absolutely.
Super, thank you very much, Louise. I think final question from Pauline.
Thank you. It's linked to Lindsay's, actually. It was linked to Lindsay's. I completely agree with you, Lindsay. It's meaningless would probably be the best description. And I thought it was the statutory format you were following as well, rather than just the way you did it. What we did, which I think might help, is do things. So rather than comparing salaries on the same job, we compared job families. So you got a hierarchy of jobs. You got senior first officers, captains, pilot managers, and you compared the whole lot, which gave you a view of Stephen's problem, which is whether you're promoting people or whether you're leaving all the women at the bottom. And also it gives you a view of whether on the same pay spine or the same experience and same longevity of service and the same difficulty of job, you've got a gap. So if you could gather them together in job families rather than just roles, I think that might help as well.
I think that would take us a little bit longer than this version, but just to confirm, that is absolutely some of the work we're now doing around our job evaluation scheme, so that as we progress each time, yes, you're absolutely right. So the integrity of our data improves each time we come. So we'll go in steps. We'll definitely demonstrate a different way of just, I think, sharing the information, and then I think we take it to a bit more of a superior level once we've got there with regard to how we're looking at our job evaluations and our job descriptions.
One of the other things we did was, rather than trying to boil the whole ocean, we started with the areas where we thought we had a problem and did the job families in those areas. So, you might want to do highways, for example, or whatever you want to do, and just focus on one and then move on to another rather than trying to do everything.
So I think this is another area where Louise and Sally will be working to bring a lot of improvements in the future. And I mean, I would propose that we accept this report, and we are noting the gender and ethnicity pay gap report, and you're going to be coming back sooner rather than later with the next one. So can I have a second of that one, Stephen? And all those in favour? Super, unanimous again. Now, the next one is something that I think we could talk about for a couple of hours, and in the interests of time and us getting back to our families at a reasonable time this evening, what I'm going to suggest is that we introduce this report as largely as a concept of a suggested improvement for the future. We will have some time where people can comment, but that we allow a window after this meeting for people to write to Louise with further suggestions. Louise will be coming back to us in the next meeting with the full report, and I think it's going to be something that we probably develop over time to come up with something which is improved from what we've had in the past. So this is the Agency and Temporary Worker report. Now, we wanted to do a number of things. So first of all, we wanted to improve our focus on what we're paying our contractors, our agency workers, our temporary workers. Some of them are very necessary to the work of the council, but some of them can be very expensive as well. Now, what we've done up until now is we've had a regular report which has come to the part 2 of the meeting. So there hasn't been public scrutiny of this information. It was a very large report. It included a lot of information about each single role that we had. I think I had a bit of a concern that some of the roles mentioned were probably quite identifiable, which from a data protection point of view isn't great. And what we really wanted to do was to bring strategic focus to this, to take us as a body away from the fine detail and to look at what are the big things that we really need to be looking at, to be challenging, to be coming up with suggestions about how we can improve our management of this workforce. So Louise and Sally have done a great piece of work coming up with a suggested report. What I'm going to suggest is we take some time tonight to come up with our immediate comments on that report. Do you feel this meets our needs for a report which can be discussed as in a part 1 of a meeting, so there is public scrutiny of this information? What things would you like to see added in? Are there elements that you think that we should have which would need to take part, for the discussion to be handled in a part 2? And we did have an additional suggestion from Sally, which I thought was a very good one, which is that where we identify that there are issues, that we give put more power in the hands of the department. So if there was a question about children's services, the contractors and the temporary workers that we had within children's services that proved, for example, it would go to you, and you would discuss that with the department and scrutinise that within the department, which I think gives more power, more responsibility to the department to look at these areas. But do you want to do an introduction from here, Louise, about what you put together for us to look at tonight?
Again, it'll be a bit of a double act because I think that's the best way that we work. So this is Q3. So I do note that this is the Q3 report. It is a quite high level from the point of view of it's looking at directorates and then picking out specifics about what's actually then happening in each of those directorates with regard to why you will see certain spend in certain areas. I think we had a very detailed conversation back in January, and I can remember quite clearly and as councillors, you identified the fact that there are shortages of skills in certain areas, and we don't have a choice at certain times, and we do have to bring in obviously agency staff to cover that. And in no way or means are we looking to hide that in any shape, way or form. We want to be absolutely back to that transparency word, back to sharing obviously the information wherever we can. I think the other piece of work that I just also want to share with you that we've also there's been a mandate back into managers, again, just putting a bit more governance into how we bring in our temporary and agency workers. So we have a contract called Matrix, and all managers must go through that process for when they bring people in. And what that means is that the council then spends less money because we have obviously fees that have been negotiated very strongly as far as we possibly can to make sure that we're making improvements. Sally, I appreciate your team, on a day-to-day are a lot closer because obviously each business partner then looks after each of these directorates. I don't know if there was anything more specific you just wanted to pick up on any of that or anything else you want to add.
I think we've also through our procurement team have removed a number of agencies that we no longer use because they won't sign up to the framework. They were costly. So they have actually been removed. They've also got bad reputations. So we want to make sure that if we are having to engage, we're engaging through the framework and the most appropriate contractors and agency workers also. But what the next steps are is to have more regular information that will go out to the directors. So we've built dashboards in that will allow the business partnering team to talk to the directors on a more frequent basis and allow that open conversation, that challenge to happen. So if we know we've got long tenures, what are you doing about that long tenure? When did you last go out to advert? Have you tried to recruit into it? Let's test the market to almost substantiate why we're having to keep an agency worker in place. The market does change quite a lot in some areas, so highways particularly, some other fields, you will see some people moving around and looking for those permanent opportunities and not wanting to be interims all the time. So there is a lot of work that's going in. We've also got an agency contracts manager starting in July, who will solely focus on this and work closely with the team again and with the directorates to make sure that we are driving the agency usage down. So Louise has said, though, there are skills shortages, children's social care being one, but additionally, Q3, Q4, you do tend to see a spike because we get these pockets of money dumped on us from central government. We have to spend it. And the only way to fill and deliver what they're asking us to deliver is through agency because of the recruitment process. So it is something we're conscious about, and it is something we're working hard on with procurement. We've got a steering group in place as well. So we have fortnightly meetings just to discuss the agency usage. We're having more control over Matrix on it from a framework perspective. And we should start to see with offering on framework contracts being increased, the costs start to reduce as well.
That's great, thank you. Can I jump in first of all with a question? I mean, what we want to do with this report really is to facilitate a strategic level discussion. So will it be possible where you have known areas where we have used agency staff for a very good reason, like the one that you've just highlighted there, that, you know, the government has given us some money and we need to spend it, and that means that we have to take on agency and contract staff. Is it possible to, in the report, to highlight that this has happened? And ideally, when you're presenting the figures to us, to actually in some way separate out the spending which has been, there may be times when that's not possible because you have had to take on one person to do a particular piece of work, and so you can't highlight that without making it obvious what we're paying to a particular individual. But if we can pull that out, and there may also be areas of staff, so for example children's social workers, where we know that you are trying to manage the situation as best as you can, but actually it's very hard to staff up with the children's social workers that we need without using agency and contract staff, where again we make it clear that these are the numbers of these staff, this is the salaries that, you know, that the amount of the salary that we're paying to that group, so that they're separated out, and then we can focus our discussions on the areas where we really need to challenge. And Pauline, I can see that you want to ask a question.
Yeah, I think the thing that would probably help the discussion in this is not just money, but heads. And the other thing, and that's HCE, not actual physical bodies. And the other thing might be the proportion by role. So I've got 56 social workers and 46 of them are contractors, is a different story from I've got 600 social workers and 46 of them are contractors. So I think if you could do that at a, not a detailed role level, but a role level that is enough to give you some intelligence, that would be super, and it would take it up a level from what we had before. So
I think that would add a lot of value. And Stephen?
I think it would also be helpful if we got a better sense of how we compare with other local authorities. I don't know how easy that is to compile, but agency workers currently make up 7% of our workforce, consultants 0.7%. I mean, that sounds like a relatively small, it sounds like a small proportion, but what isn't clear to me is, you know, is it smaller than other councils? Is it larger than other councils? Is it the same as other councils? And that would be helpful. Obviously, all councils are different. They have different pressures on them. You'd need to compare like with like. We need to compare with other unitary authorities. It's no point in comparing with authorities that don't have adult social care or children's services, because these are too clearly the areas where we have the most need of agency workers, contract staff. But I would repeat the point, if I may, that sometimes this is totally unavoidable, not simply because it's very difficult to recruit social workers, for instance, but it's also when we are fortunate, and this council is actually very good at being proactive in bidding for external funding, but that external funding is usually short term. You know, it's 3 years or less in some cases. So you can't take on a permanent employee. You've got to take on contract staff. And sometimes this can be a sign of our success, not a sign of somehow things going wrong. So I think strategically we need to recognise that we need to look at agency workers and contract staff and even consultants as not necessarily a sign that things are going wrong. They are in some ways a sign that things are going swimmingly well.
I think that's an absolutely excellent point, and as much as possible, if we can include that in the narrative and, you know, note with the figures when that happens, I think that would be really valuable. Lindsay?
This is another topic that Personnel Board have been looking at for quite a large number of years, and it's I think it's interesting because I think there was a time when it felt like we were getting out of control on this area, but at the same time, it was always accepted that there were areas such as adult social services and children's services, and for some reason, certain high-rise roles, which I never quite understood, but they always seem to be those roles that you can never get anyone, always seemed to stand out and were persistent, and you couldn't do very much about them. What I would like to understand is that now at the moment, as a country, there's huge skill shortages in whole areas, and the cost of living, where it's expensive to live around here, is making it even harder in certain aspects for us to be able to get people. So I suspect that we may be drifting up again, because I don't know. 7% does sound similar to what we were before, but this goes back a year, or part of a year. So I think that we need to look at trends, linking in the points that have been raised, and particularly with Stephen saying about short-term contracts. We've got some temporary people because we're in the local plan process, and there comes a point when that will finish. And so we are going to have roles that by definition are short-term. And I think it is clear that what we need to link in is we need to make it clear that these are the areas where we can expect some form of agency stroke contract role. But what would be concerning, and I don't know whether we got it, is whether we are then starting to move into other areas where it has been traditional that we've had full-time staff, and that now we're starting to find it difficult to recruit. And we're then starting to get some areas that are starting to worry us. That, I think, would be useful to know. We may not, but with that skill shortage issue you keep in, and I'll go down on holiday in North Devon, every single shop I went to or every restaurant, staff needed. Nobody there. And consequently, what they could do as a business was limited. And I went to one public house that was doing lunchtime, and he said, loads of tables, and there was about a quarter full, and then he was turning people away because he could not meet that demand. So we've got that element coming through in the council. So have we got areas where we're now finding it difficult to recruit that is now causing us those same problems? That is the converse of what this is, but it's the two are linked.
Yes, I think that would be a very valuable thing for us to be keeping an eye on and to be highlighting in this report, is where we've got new areas where we're finding it hard to recruit, or where we're finding it much more expensive to recruit. But also, actually, the opposite side of the coin is where it is more cost effective to have agency or contractor recruitment, because you're bringing somebody in for 6 months, they're going to deliver a piece of work absolutely excellently, and it's just the most effective way of bringing somebody in, and it would be good if we can highlight that as well. Stephen, you had your hand up. Would you be, you're okay. I would like to kind of bring this one to a close, but leave it open for members to come to Louise with ideas, with suggestions, and for this to be something, it's a report that we're going to be improving in a very live way moving forward over the course of the year. So I would like to propose that we note the content of the report and agree the proposed new style of reporting with that caveat. I can see a seconder there from Stephen. Those in favour? Super. Okay, and that's everybody. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're now moving to part 2 of the meeting. And so point 13, exclusion of the public, that under section 100A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the agenda items listed below on the grounds that they involve likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1 and 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act as amended as appropriate. Okay, seconded. All those in favour?